Okay, I wanted to make a video about the End Times campaign that I released in the week just gone. This came about when I was writing the Savage Worlds Fantasy Skirmish rulebook. So I was going through, I was writing it all, and one of the whole points behind Savage Worlds Fantasy Skirmish is it can be incorporated easily into a role-playing game. So you can have a role-playing campaign that gets to a stage where there's a big battle, and rather than use the mass battle rules in the Savage Worlds core book, which are very good, you can turn it into a war game. You can play that as an extended session, you can battle it out as any other war game, and you can then move back to the role-playing with the implications from the battle. So it's an adjunct to the role-playing, as well as being a war games rules in its own right. But I'm thinking, how do we showcase that element? And at about the time I was thinking that, I then started reading the Savage Worlds Fantasy Companion, which is an awesome book. If you don't already have that, I recommend you get that urgently. It's fantastic. It gives so many options in there for new fantasy rules, fantasy options, and so on. And I thought, why not create a campaign that brings together the Fantasy Companion for Savage Worlds, brings in the war games rules, and puts all of that into a full campaign. Now, Savage Worlds is well known for having plot point campaigns. This is campaigns where each session, each part of it is briefly described to allow GM to build on it, but it does still require significant work. They're great in that you get a whole campaign in a few pages, but you still need quite a lot of prep time. And what I wanted to do was produce something with almost no prep time for GM that brought together Savage Worlds, the Fantasy Companion, Fantasy Skirmish book, and indeed all of the benefits of the Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop that I use for all of my gaming. So I thought we need to bring this together into a campaign. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to aim for something classic. So here I've got an old D&D module, black and white, sort of quite basic map there. I wanted something with that feel. I wanted something with the classic old school feel. But what I also wanted to do was replicate something like this, which is a full campaign. It takes you from zero to hero, that old fantasy trope. And this has all of the adventures in there. It has maps, it has stats, it has items, it has descriptions, it has everything. So it walks you through the entire campaign. And so I wanted to do that for Savage Worlds, but include the Fantasy Companion, include the Skirmish battle. Hence the End Times campaign was born. And so it's a full 20-part campaign. You can see here there are 20 different adventures within there, starting with a very, very classic clear rats out of a basement adventure for novice adventurers in part 1, all the way up to saving the world at the end of part 20. And because in Savage Worlds Adventure Edition you get one advance after each of these sessions, it means that when you start off you're a novice. When you finish part 20, you're well into your legendary rank. So the characters then are serious heroes. And each of these sessions is fully described. So we've got room descriptions, we've got a little bit to read out for each room, as you had in a lot of classic modules. We've got stats in there, we've got maps, and I went for black and white maps, and there's been a little bit of discussion about the maps and their, why they're black and white. I wanted to go for black and white maps because as I said, I wanted to emulate the very classic feel of those old modules. Also, colour maps can be a little crowded sometimes, and especially on a virtual tabletop, having a full colour map with all sorts of furniture and so on, you can sometimes lose the tokens on there. So I wanted to go for a more classic feel with the map, but also the book is going to be published in black and white. And I have it here, and I've not put it within reach, which I should have done. So we've got the black and white book. That's actually considerably cheaper to print than a colour book is. And while a colour rule book is often very good, you're referring to the rule book again and again and again over years and years and years. A campaign you're going to buy once, you're going to run through it, and you're probably not going to run through it again. And although I obviously want people to buy it, spending twice as much on a book you're only going to use once, you know. So I went for that choice. So I've gone for a very clean classic look. Again, fairly simplistic layout, top and bottom borders, but white pages, because again, sometimes going for full colour with a full colour background can actually get in the way of ease of use. And of course, as anyone who knows Arion Games knows, most of my books go for relatively simplistic, relatively straightforward, generally black and white layout because of that classic feel, which is really what Arion Games is built upon. So we've got all 20 sessions here are fully described. They have everything you need to run that campaign. Now, that doesn't stop a GM dropping in additional sections if you want to expand it. And obviously the 20 sessions in here will take 30 to 40 gaming sessions to run through. You're talking best part of a year to run that through, even if you went straight through. But of course, if you want to expand that, you can drop in extra sessions in between. As long as you keep the experience progression the same as written, it shouldn't be a problem. And I went for a very generic fantasy world for this. The world is not named. You can drop it into Forgotten Realms or many classic fantasy worlds with a fair amount of ease. There's a few setting conceits built into the campaign. They're not difficult to work around. And if you want to play it as is, well, a very brief description, the local setting is given, enough to play the campaign, but not enough to really bog the characters down. So there's no deep differences about the gods, or the fact that the heroes start in a small town with wilderness in between, and in the wilderness are goblins and orcs and wolves and trolls and bears, and it's the sort of fantasy world that every player will know. So it's very, very easy to get players into it. You don't have to describe the setting. You don't have to describe how it's inside a world, or how there are flying islands, or whatever. It's basic fantasy world and generic. And so this is a relatively simple campaign for a GM to run, because I also wanted it to be something that even a new Savage Worlds GM could run. You can sit down, you can pick up the book, you can pick up your Savage Worlds rulebook and run it. As long as you've got a good basic understanding of Savage Worlds rules, you can run this, and that was the key. But of course, as I said, part of it was bringing into it the Fantasy Skirmish part. So here we've got the section for one of the battles. So we've got the terrain laid out of how to set up the battlefield. We've got the units that are going to be present on each side. We've got the impact of the battle rolls, and so on and so forth. So from this, you can use the terrain that you have to put something together that is roughly similar. You can fight that battle on the tabletop, and again, that's likely to take a couple of gaming sessions to run through. And I realise not everyone will want to do that. Some people may be playing on Fantasy Grounds or Roll20 or another VTT. And although the Fantasy Skirmish rules are not different enough from Savage Worlds that you couldn't cobble that together in a virtual tabletop, some people may prefer just to go with the standard Savage Worlds mass battle rules. And so we've got details on how to do that. Obviously, it renders a whole session down into 20 minutes of rolls or an hour of rolls, but you can do that if you really do want to and you don't want to fight it out as a war game. But obviously that's part of the fun in my view, as you would probably expect me to say. So we've also got some new Fantasy Skirmish units. We've effectively got a new faction. This new faction will actually go in full into the Fantasy Skirmish supplemental book that is now being written and was a part of the Kickstarter. So again, you've got all the information you need to run both the adventure part and the war games part of this campaign. And so I'm really happy with the product because it does bring together the Fantasy Skirmish and the role-playing side of things. It brings together the war game and the RPG using the same rules, same characters, and so on. But what it also does is it brings in the Fantasy Companion, which is a brilliant book and uses that quite heavily. And it provides a great one-book campaign for Savage Worlds, a classic fantasy campaign for Savage Worlds that you can just sit down and run with almost no prep. And so, from my point of view, I think it's a really good campaign. It's a really good buy, and hopefully you'll have some fun with it. Hopefully that was useful, getting a bit of insight into this latest product. I'm going to try and get another video done in a couple of days.